Lydia ran her fingers along the edge of the quilt, checking the final stitch. All around her rose the murmur of the fair, the smell of maple syrup and fried dough, but her attention stayed on the fabric. Swallow's tail was a complicated pattern. Every diagonal had to fall just so that the eye would not snag but glide. Her great-grandmother used to say, "A good quilt is a prayer without words." "How much?" A man's voice, low. Lydia looked up. Jonas King stood across the table, hat in his hands. She knew him, everyone knew everyone in the community, but she had never spoken with him for longer than 2 sentences. He was 3 years older, worked in his father's shop repairing wheels and buggies. His hands were strong, his face calm, but his eyes were a shade too attentive. $110, she said, keeping her voice even. That is for an adult bed. And for a child? I do not make children's quilts for the fair, only by order. He nodded, his gaze still on the quilt. His fingers touched the edge of the fabric barely, as if he were afraid to spoil it. My sister Elsa, he said at last. She is 12. She was sick this winter, for a long time. Mama said a new quilt would help keep her warm. Lydia pressed her lips together. She remembered Elsa, a slender girl who always carried a basket too big for her. I can make one for her, she said quietly, but not this pattern. A child needs something different, something lighter. Jonas finally looked at her, not at the fabric. Lighter? Yes. Star path, maybe, or sunbeams. Something that reminds you of summer. He was silent, and she felt her cheeks begin to burn. Perhaps she had said too much. Perhaps he would think she was trying to push a more expensive pattern. All right, he said. Star path. How much will it cost, and how long will it take? $70. 2 weeks if I work every evening. I will pay $80 if you make it in 1 week. Lydia hesitated. 1 week meant working late into the night, until her eyes ached from lantern light. But something in his voice, in the way he stood holding his hat, made her nod. Fine, 1 week. He reached out his hand formal, as if it were a bargain between men, and she, after a moment's pause, shook it. His palm was warm, calloused. The touch lasted a second, maybe 2, but when he let go, she felt that something had shifted. Something very small, barely noticeable, like the first breath of wind before a storm. Thank you, Lydia. He walked away, and she watched him until his figure dissolved into the crowd. That evening, as she and her father drove home in the buggy, Deacon Zook was silent longer than usual. Lydia knew that silence it meant he was weighing something, choosing his words. Jonas King came up to you, he said at last. It was not a question. Yes, he ordered a quilt for his sister. Is Elsa sick? She was. This winter. The deacon nodded, flicking the horse's back with the whip barely, to show he was there, not to hurry it. Jonas is a good boy, he said, but he was in Rumspringa longer than the others. He used the Amish word without translation, then added, for clarity, that is the time when our teenagers are allowed a taste of the outside world. Some say he did not quite come back. Lydia clasped her hands on her lap. She had heard the talk. Jonas had been in the city for almost a year. He worked construction, lived among the English-meaning non-Amish people. When he returned, folks looked at him with caution, no open judgment, but not full trust either. He is here, she said softly. He came back. Yes. The deacon smiled, but it was a sad smile. But a person's return home does not mean he leaves everything at the door. They drove on in silence. That same evening, when Lydia was already seated at the quilting frame in the parlor, her father came into the house with a letter in his hand. His face was stone. From the county, he said, laying the paper on the table. They will build a road, a highway, across our fields. Lydia lifted her head from her work. Her mother froze by the stove, a ladle suspended in midair. When? She asked. Next spring, unless we... The deacon fell silent, rubbing his face. Unless we object. Can we? He looked at her long, heavy. I do not know, daughter. I do not know whether we have the right. Lydia wanted to say something, but the words stuck in her throat. She knew what that road meant. It meant the fields where she ran as a child, where corn and wheat grew, where her great-grandmother lay buried by the old oak. All of it would disappear under asphalt. It meant the hum of cars would replace the silence that had been a prayer. Eben, her mother said at last, her voice trembling. Maybe Eben will know what to do. The deacon turned sharply. Eben is our son, but he chose another life. We cannot ask him for help. That would be wrong. But he is Lydia's brother, her mother insisted. He is not a stranger. He is a stranger to the community, the deacon cut in. And that is his choice. We must respect it. Silence filled the room, heavy and sticky, like the dampness before a storm. Lydia bent over the frame again, the needle pinched between her fingers. She remembered Eben, her older brother, who always laughed too loudly, who dreamed of college, of the city, of the world beyond the fields. He left 5 years ago, and since then the family spoke of him as if he were dead. Not with anger, but with a quiet sorrow worse than anger. I will finish the quilt for Elsa, she said without looking up. By Saturday. Her father nodded and went out, and Lydia sank the needle into the cloth. The next morning, while Lydia was feeding the chickens, a buggy pulled into the yard. Jonas, he climbed down, tied his horse to the post, and walked over holding a small wooden box. "Good morning," he said, taking off his hat. "Good morning," she answered, feeling her heartbeat quicken. "I brought fabric," he explained, extending the box. "Mama said you might not have the right colors. There is yellow and blue for the stars." Lydia took the box and lifted the lid. The fabric inside was new, neatly folded. The colors were perfect for Star Path. "Thank you," she said softly. This helps." Jonas nodded but did not move. He stood looking at the field behind her, and she could see his jaw tighten, as if he were trying to say something but did not know how. "I heard about the road," he said at last. "The highway." Lydia lowered her gaze. "Yes, Father got the letter yesterday." "That is," he broke off, then tried again. "That is not right. Your land has been here for 100 years. More." "Maybe God wants it so," she said, but even to herself her voice sounded unsure. Jonas looked at her, and she saw something in his eyes, something that frightened and drew her at once. "I do not believe God wants cars to roll over the graves of our ancestors," he said quietly but firmly. "There are things worth fighting for, Lydia, even if the community says we must accept." She did not know how to answer. His words were dangerous, they touched the forbidden, what one did not speak aloud. Gelassenheit, humble surrender to the will of God, was the foundation of their life. But how do you accept what destroys everything you love? "I have to go," Jonas said, putting on his hat. "But if you want to talk about anything, I will be in the shop every evening." He left before she could reply, and Lydia stood there, pressing the box to her chest, watching his buggy disappear around the bend. Lydia sewed at night when the house slept. The lantern by the frame threw a trembling light over the cloth, and her fingers moved by themselves, needle up, needle down, stitch by stitch. Star Path grew under her hands, yellow triangles coming together as stars, blue fabric framing them like the sky. On the third evening, as she worked, she heard a soft knock at the door. Her mother and father were already asleep, so Lydia stood, took the lantern, and went carefully to the entry. "Who is there?" "It is me, Eben." Her heart lurched. For 5 years, she had not heard that voice, not in person, not this close. Lydia opened the door the width of a hand. Her brother stood on the threshold in jeans and a dark jacket. His hair was short, not Amish, his face clean-shaven. He looked like a stranger, and at the same time so familiar it hurt to breathe. "Lydia," he said softly, "I am sorry it is so late. I know I have no right to come, but—" "Come in," she cut him off, opening the door wider. "Quickly, before Papa wakes." Eben stepped inside carefully, as if he were afraid to break something by the very fact of being there. Lydia shut the door and turned back to him, holding the lantern between them like a shield. "I heard about the road," he said without preamble. "I can help. I am a contractor now. I know people at the county. There are ways to delay construction, to appeal the decision." "Papa will not accept your help," Lydia answered, her voice steadier than she wished. "You know that." "I know." Eben rubbed his face, and she noticed the shadows under his eyes, a weariness deeper than the body. "But this is my family, my land too. I cannot just stand aside." "You are already standing aside," Lydia said, the word sharper than she meant. "You left, Eben. You chose another life." "I chose college. I chose a chance to learn what lies beyond these fields. That does not mean I stopped loving you. But you stopped being one of us." Eben was silent, and in that silence Lydia felt the full weight of a loss, not death, but something worse. When a person dies, you know they have gone to God. But when a person chooses the world, you do not know where they have gone. You only know they are gone. "I will leave my phone number," Eben said at last, pulling a small slip of paper from his pocket. "If you change your minds, if you decide you need help, please, Lydia, give it to Papa." She took the paper without looking at it. Eben lingered a moment, then turned to the door. "You are still quilting," he said, nodding toward the frame. "I remember great-grandma teaching you. You were so little then you could barely reach the table." "I remember," Lydia whispered. "She would be proud of you." He left, and Lydia stood there, the paper clenched in her fist, until she heard the sound of an engine of course he had come by car fade into the night. Then she returned to the frame, but her hands were trembling, and she had to stop to keep from spoiling the stitches. The next morning at breakfast, Deacon Zook was silent. Lydia knew he had heard. Perhaps he had not fully woken, but he had heard voices, heard the door. Her mother looked at no one, busy with the oatmeal, but her silence was eloquent too. "He came," Lydia said at last, unable to bear it. "Eben, last night." Her father lifted his eyes. They were tired. "I know. He wants to help. He says he can stop the road. We did not ask for his help. But we need it." The words burst out louder than she intended. Her mother flinched. The deacon set down his fork. "Lydia," he said softly but firmly, "I understand that you are worried. I am worried too. But we cannot go to Eben. He chose life outside the community. If we accept his help, we break the Ordnung, our rule of life. We will show others they may leave and come back when it suits them." "But he is our son," her mother said at last, barely audible. "Our blood. And that is what makes it so hard." Her father reached out and covered her hand with his. "But the rules do not exist to punish us. They exist to keep us together. If we begin to make exceptions." He did not finish, but Lydia understood. "If you start making exceptions, the community falls apart. Everyone will decide his case is special, his need more important than the rules. And in the end, nothing will be left to hold them together." "Then what will we do?" she asked. "Just let them take our land?" The deacon paused, then said, "There will be a meeting on Saturday. The whole community will gather. We will discuss it together and decide what to do. Together, Lydia, not alone." She nodded, though something inside her screamed that they were wasting time. That while they prayed and discussed, the county would already start marking routes, bringing in equipment, preparing to destroy. On Friday, Lydia finished the quilt. The last star fell into place, the last stitch sealed the edge. She spread the fabric on the table, and Star Path shone in the morning light. She rolled the quilt carefully, wrapped it in paper, and walked out of the house. The buggy stood by the shed, but her father was in the field, her mother in the garden. She could have waited for one of them to take her to the King's, but something pushed her to go now, at once. She walked through the field, carrying the quilt in her arms. The sun was already up, but the air still held the night's coolness. Wheat heads swayed in the wind, and Lydia thought of her great-grandmother walking this same way 100 years ago, when there was not yet even the Zook house here, only field and sky. The king's shop stood about 1 kilometer from their house at the edge of the community. Lydia heard the sounds of work from far off, the thud of a hammer, the squeak of wood. As she came closer, she saw Jonas, his back to her, bent over a wheel, fixing something in the hub. "Jonas," she called. He turned, set down the hammer, and wiped his hands on his pants. "Lydia, you have finished already?" "Yes, here." She held out the bundle. Jonas came, took the quilt, and unfolded it carefully. When he saw the fabric, something crossed his face that made Lydia catch her breath. Not a smile, something deeper. Wonder, gratitude, something else she could not name. "This is," he trailed off, touching the stars with his fingertips. "This is beautiful, Lydia. Elsa, she will be so happy." "I hope so." Lydia felt her cheeks flush. "I tried to make it light, as you asked." Jonas lifted his gaze, and their eyes met. A second, two, too long for a casual glance, not long enough for something more. But Lydia felt something shift inside her, like ice on a river just before the thaw. "Lydia, he began, but then Old Man King, Jonas's father, came out of the shop, and the air changed in an instant. "Good morning, Lydia," he greeted, nodding. "That is the quilt for Elsa." "Yes, Mr. King." "Fine work. Jonas, pay the girl." Jonas hesitated, then went into the shop and returned with money. He handed it to Lydia, and she tucked the bills into her pocket without counting. "Thank you," she said softly. "We should be thanking you," Old Man King replied. "Are you coming to the meeting tomorrow, about the road?" "Yes, with my whole family." "Good. The community must decide this together." Lydia nodded and turned to go, but Jonas caught up with her a few steps from the shop. "Lydia, wait," he said quietly, glancing back to be sure his father did not hear. "Tomorrow, after the meeting, could you meet me, just to talk?" "About what?" she asked, though her heart already knew the answer. "About the road, about what we can do." He paused, then added more softly, "About us." The word us hung between them, dangerous and sweet at the same time. "I do not know if that is a good idea," Lydia whispered. "Perhaps not." Jonas smiled sadly. "But I want to talk with you, not as a customer and a craftswoman, just as people." Lydia knew she ought to say no. She knew that meeting alone, without a reason, without witnesses, would stir questions, rumors. But something in his eyes, in the way he stood as if balancing on the edge of a cliff, made her nod. "By the old oak," she said, "at the edge of our field, at 4. I will be there." She walked away without looking back, but she could feel his gaze on her until she turned the corner and was gone. Saturday began with a thick fog lying over the fields as if God had covered the earth with a blanket. Lydia woke early, unrested all night. She had dreamed of roads, of asphalt growing through wheat, of cars rumbling over her great-grandmother's grave. The meeting was to be held at Elder Miller's house, the largest in the community, with room for everyone. Lydia put on her best dress, dark blue, and a white apron. Her mother sat silent at the table, her fingers worrying the edge of a napkin. "It will be all right," Deacon Zook said, though his voice did not sound convinced. They went by buggy, father, mother, and Lydia. On the way they met other families, all headed to the Millers. Everyone's faces were restrained, but Lydia saw the tension in their shoulders, in the way they held the reins, in their quiet. When they arrived, the yard was already full of buggies. Lydia climbed down and helped her mother. Her father tied the horse. Inside, the long tables had been pushed aside, benches set in a circle. The women gathered in one corner, the men in another. Lydia found a place by the window, where she could see the field just like theirs, just like every field in the county. Elder Miller stood tall, gray, his beard to his chest. "Brothers and sisters," he began, his voice firm but kind. "We have gathered today because a trial is coming upon our community. The county wants to build a road across the Zook family's land. This is not only their problem, it is our problem. For when they come for one, Tomorrow they will come for all." A murmur of agreement moved through the room. Lydia clenched her hands on her knees. "The question is," the elder continued, "what are we to do? The Ordnung teaches us humility. It teaches us to accept the will of God. But is it the will of God to allow the land of our ancestors to be destroyed? Do we have the right to fight?" He paused, letting the words settle. Then he turned to Deacon Zook. "Brother, tell us, what is in your heart?" Lydia's father rose slowly. She saw how tight his shoulders were, how he gripped his hat. "In my heart, there is pain," he said softly but clearly. "This land belonged to my grandfather, and to his grandfather. My grandmother is buried here, and her mother. My daughter was born here. When I walk the field in the morning, I hear their voices in the wind. I see their labor in every head of grain." He stopped, swallowed. Lydia felt her eyes fill with tears. "But," her father went on, "I also remember the words of Christ. When they strike you on one cheek, turn the other. We are not people of fighting. We are people of peace. And I do not know," his voice broke, "I do not know if I have the right to fight, even for this." Silence fell. Then Jonas stood. Lydia flinched. She had not expected him to speak. The young usually kept quiet at meetings, listening to their elders. "Elder, with your permission," Jonas began, and Lydia heard in his voice a hardness she had not heard before. "I understand Deacon Zook's words. I understand Gelassenheit, the humble surrender to God's will. But I have been in the world. I have seen how they behave. They will not stop if we simply bow our heads. They will take the Zook's land, then come for the Millers, then for ours. They do not understand the language of humility. They understand only the language of power." A murmur approval from some, disapproval from others. "What do you propose, son?" Elder Miller asked, caution in his voice. "I propose that we fight," Jonas said plainly. "Not with fists, not with violence, but with the law. They have their law, and we can use it against them. There are lawyers who help communities like ours. There are ways to show that this land has historic value, that there are graves here that—" "Enough," one of the elders broke in. Abraham Stoltzfus, a neighboring deacon. "You speak of worldly things, Jonas King, of lawyers and courts. We do not go to their courts. We do not play by their rules." "Then by whose rules do we play?" Jonas raised his voice, and Lydia felt her heart pound. "By rules that let them take everything we hold dear? By rules that turn humility into weakness?" "Jonas," his father stood, his face red. "Sit down. You have no right to speak to your elders that way." But Jonas did not sit. He stood, and Lydia saw something wild in him, something that frightened and thrilled her at once. "I have the right to speak the truth," he said, "even if it is unpleasant, even if it breaks the way we are used to doing things." Elder Miller lifted his hand, and the room quieted. "Jonas, your words," he paused, choosing carefully, "your words hold truth, but they also hold anger and pride. You speak as if you know better than the community, as if your time in the world has given you wisdom we do not have." "I am not saying I know better," Jonas shook his head. "I am saying we cannot sit with our hands folded. There is a difference between humility and surrender." "And is there a difference between fighting and pride?" Abraham Stoltzfus asked sharply. Jonas did not answer. He stood with fists clenched, and Lydia saw the struggle in him, the urge to shout, to fight, to break all this smothering humility, and at the same time the understanding that he had lost, that the community had already decided. "We will vote," Elder Miller said. "All who are in favor of going to lawyers, to secular courts, to stop the road, raise your hand." Jonas raised his hand. A few other young men, no more than 5. Lydia clenched her hands, but did not raise hers. Women did not vote at meetings. They only watched. "All who are in favor of relying on the wisdom of the community and acting peacefully by speaking with the county without involving secular law." A forest of hands. A majority. Almost everyone. "The decision is made," Elder Miller said and sat. "We will send a delegation to the county. We will explain why this land matters. We will ask them to consider another route. But we will not go to court. That is not our way." Jonas stood a moment longer, then turned sharply and left the house. The door slammed behind him, and the sound was like thunder. Jonas's father bowed his head. His mother wept quietly. Lydia looked out the window to where Jonas stood by the buggy, leaning on a wheel, his shoulders shaking. She wanted to go to him, but she could not hear, not now, not in front of everyone. The gathering ended with prayer. People drifted away slowly, uncertainly, as after a funeral. Lydia helped the women tidy up, carry out cups, sweep the floor. Her mother gripped her shoulder too tightly as they walked to the buggy. "Do not think about him," her mother whispered. "About Jonas, he is a good boy, but there is too much of the world in him. He will not find peace here." Lydia did not answer. She climbed into the buggy and stared at the road as they drove home. The clock in her head was counting down to 4 o'clock, to the old oak, to the meeting she had promised. Lydia reached the oak at 3:30, to be safe, to make sure no one was nearby. The tree stood at the edge of their field, right where the woods began. Her great-grandmother used to say it was more than 200 years old, that when the first Amish came to this place, the oak was already huge. She sat on a stone by the roots and pulled on her shawl. The day was warm, but in the oak's shade there was always coolness. She waited. Minutes stretched like hours. Maybe he had changed his mind. Maybe he had realized it was a bad idea. But at 4 she heard footsteps. Jonas came out of the trees without his hat, hair tousled. His face was tired, his eyes red. Had he cried, or just not slept? She could not tell. "You came," he said, surprise in his voice, as if he truly had not believed it. "I promised." He sat on the grass beside her, not too close, but close enough that she felt the warmth of his body. They were silent a long time. The wind rustled the oak leaves. Somewhere far away a hen clucked. The world was the same as always, but something had changed, something between them, something in the air. "I know I looked like a fool," Jonas said at last. "At the meeting, I know I should not have raised my voice." "You did not shout," Lydia shook her head. "You told the truth. They just did not want to hear it. Because it is not their truth." He plucked a blade of grass, twisting it in his fingers. "They live in another world, Lydia. A world where God decides everything, where humility is the answer to every question. And I have seen another world. A world where, if you do not fight, they simply crush you." "Then why did you come back?" she asked softly. "If there is so much truth there, why did you not stay?" Jonas looked at her, and she saw pain in his eyes, so deep it made it hard to breathe. "Because there is no home there," he said simply. "There is freedom, yes. There are opportunities. But there is no place where you belong, where people know your name not because they read it on a badge, but because their grandfathers knew your grandfathers, where silence is not emptiness, but fullness." He fell quiet, then added more softly, "And because I could not stop thinking about this oak, about the fields, about how the earth smells after rain, about—" He did not finish, but Lydia knew. She felt the same thing, the pull of this place, stronger than reason, stronger than logic. It was in the blood, in the bones. "Mrs. Clark," Lydia said suddenly, "the planner from the county. She came to see Papa last week. She said that if we can prove the land has historic value, they might consider another route." Jonas turned to her sharply. "Truly, why did the deacon not say that at the meeting?" "Because she also said they would need documents, old records, testimony, things we do not have. We do not keep papers, Jonas. We keep stories. Stories are evidence too." Jonas stood and began to pace. "There is a way. There has to be. Your great-grandmother, you said she is buried here?" "Yes, by the oak. Here." Lydia pointed to a small rise, barely visible beneath the grass. "There is no stone. We do not set stones, but I know where she is." Jonas went to the rise and crouched. He ran his palm over the earth. "If we can prove there is a burial ground here," he began. But how? Without stones, without records. There are old maps. Jonas looked at her. My grandfather used to tell me. When the first Amish came to Lancaster, they filed papers with the county. About land, about burial places. It must be stored somewhere. In the county archives, Lydia nodded slowly. But we are not allowed to go there. It is a secular institution. I am allowed. Jonas straightened. I have been in the world. I can go again. Jonas. Lydia, listen. He came over and crouched in front of her. I know I am taking a risk. I know that if the elders find out I went to the archives, to the secular offices, they will see it as defiance. But what do I have to lose? They already look at me as half lost, as someone with one foot in the world. That is not fair, Lydia whispered. Maybe not, but it is true. He held out his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Lydia laid her palm in his. His fingers closed around hers, firm, warm, like a promise. Help me, he said quietly. Tell me everything you know about your great-grandmother. When she died, what her name was, what you remember. Anything that could help find the papers. And Lydia told him about great-grandma Sarah, who lived to be 92 years old, who made quilts that did not tear even across generations, who died in her sleep, quietly, as if she simply decided to go, who wanted to be buried beneath the oak because this was where she first kissed her husband when she was 16. Jonas listened without interrupting, and Lydia spoke about her great-grandmother, about the family, about the land. And suddenly she realized she was not speaking only of them. She was speaking of herself, of how she feared losing this place, of how she feared that baptism was not a choice but a trap, of how she feared she would stay here and never feel fully alive. When she fell silent, the sun was already leaning toward the horizon. Jonas was still holding her hand. Lydia, he said quietly, what do you want? What do you truly want? Not what is expected of you, not what ought to be. What do you want? No one had ever asked her that. No one asked Amish girls what they wanted. They asked if they were ready for baptism, if they were ready for marriage, if they knew their duties, but not about desire. I want, Lydia swallowed, feeling tears rise. I want to stay here, on this land, with these people, but I also want to breathe. I want to choose, not only follow. I want. She looked at him, and the words broke free. I want you. Silence. Jonas did not move, but his eyes darkened. Something sparked in them. Lydia, he whispered, you know what that means? If there is something between us, it has to be serious. It has to end in marriage, or I will have to go, or you will. I know. And you still want that? Yes. He drew her closer slowly, giving her time to pull away, time to change her mind. But Lydia did not move away. She leaned toward him, and when their lips met, the world stopped. The kiss was gentle, careful, as if they were touching something sacred. Jonas's lips tasted of summer and hay. His hands cradled her face, his thumbs stroking her cheeks. Lydia felt her heart beating so loudly it seemed the whole county could hear. When they parted, Jonas pressed his forehead to hers. I will go to the archives tomorrow, he whispered. I will find the documents. I will prove to them that this land is holy. And then, if you still want it, I will ask your father for permission to marry. He will not give it. Lydia shook her head. Not until I take baptism, and baptism means you choose this life forever. Yes. Jonas drew back and looked into her eyes. Then take baptism, Lydia, if you truly want to stay, if this place is your home. Accept it, and then we can be together. Here, in this world we both love, even when it chokes us. Lydia nodded, though something inside her cried that this was wrong. That baptism ought to be a choice of the heart, not a price for love. But is not love also a choice of the heart? When Lydia finally walked home, the sun had already set. She crossed the field, and every step felt lighter, as if she were dancing. Her lips still tingled from the kiss. Her heart was singing. She had no idea her father was standing at the window, watching her walk in from the oak. She did not know he had seen her touch her lips and smile, and she did not know how his heart clenched with fear for a daughter who was taking the same road his son had taken. Jonas left for town early in the morning before dawn. He did not put on Amish clothes. He wore jeans and a shirt left over from Rumspringa, the Amish season when teenagers are allowed to explore the outside world hidden at the bottom of his chest. It felt strange to wear those things again lighter, more comfortable, and yet foreign, like a skin that no longer fit. He did not tell his father where he was going. He only said he had business in town, and his father did not ask, perhaps he did not want to know. His mother looked at him for a long moment, then handed him a bundle of food. "Be careful," she said softly. "The world has not become safer while you were away." The bus to Lancaster moved slowly and stopped at every station. Jonas sat by the window and watched the fields slip past. Amish farms gave way to ordinary farms, then to suburbs, then to the city. The buildings grew taller, the streets wider, and the noise heavier. The county archive occupied an old brick building downtown. Jonas walked in. The air was cold from the air conditioning and smelled of paper and something chemical. Behind the counter sat a middle-aged woman in glasses, absorbed in her computer. "Good day," Jonas said. "I am looking for old land records. About Amish settlements. Where might they be kept?" The woman glanced up, and Jonas could see her eyes quickly take him in his clothes, his hair, the way he held himself. "Amish?" she asked. "Yes, I am." He could not find a simple way to explain. "I understand," she said, nodding as if that explained everything. "Land records are in the basement, Section D, but you will need permission for access, and exact dates or names." Jonas took out the paper where he had written everything Lydia had told him. Sarah Zook died, he checked the paper, around 1970. Land in Lancaster County parcel. I do not know the exact number, but it belonged to the Zook family since the 1850s. The woman took the sheet, read it, then typed something into the computer. "Zook. Yes, there are records. Quite a few. A large family. Large enough. Wait here. I will bring the files." She disappeared through a door, and Jonas was left alone in the empty room. He sat on a bench and clasped his hands. His heart was beating too fast. He did not understand why he was so nervous. This was only an archive, only papers. But something about this place, about this world of official order that seemed to have nothing to do with God's order, made him uneasy. The woman returned with an armful of folders. "Here, land ownership records, beginning of the 19th century. There is also material on cemeteries at that time. The Amish had to register burial places to avoid disputes with the municipality." Jonas took the folders and opened the first one. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded, but the text was still legible. Names, dates spelled out, descriptions of parcels. He turned page after page, searching for something familiar. And suddenly there it was. Parcel 47, belonging to Jacob Zook. A family cemetery is marked on the eastern edge of the field, beside the oak. Jonas felt his hands begin to tremble. Here, a document. Proof. An official confirmation that Lydia's land was not just a field, but sacred ground, a place of rest. "May I make a copy?" he asked, and his voice came out hoarse. "Of course, 50 cents per page. Make them all. Every page that concerns the Zooks and the cemetery." The woman nodded and went to the copier. Jonas stood there gripping the folder and felt something inside him uncurl. Hope. Perhaps they could do this. Perhaps the community would listen when it saw an official document. When Jonas came home, evening had already fallen. He went into the house and changed back into Amish clothes, but he hid the envelope of documents under his shirt and pressed it to his chest. His father sat at the table carving a spoon. He did not lift his head when Jonas walked in. "You were in town," his father said. Not a question, simply a fact. "Yes." "For what purpose?" Jonas hesitated. He could have lied. He could have said he had bought tools and materials. But something in his father's voice and in the way he sat without looking up made Jonas tell the truth. I was looking for documents about the Zook land, about the cemetery. At last his father raised his head. His face looked tired and old. When had he aged so much? Did you find them? Yes. And now what? I will show the community. I will prove that the land has historical value, that they cannot simply take it. His father set the spoon aside and wiped his hands on his apron. Jonas, he said quietly, you are a good son, but you do not understand. The community has already decided. They do not want to fight, and when you come with these documents, these worldly proofs, you do not help. You make it worse. How can I make it worse by trying to save their land? Because you are breaking what holds us together. Unity, submission, trust that God will provide if we humble ourselves. Jonas clenched his fists. What if God wants us to fight? What if submission is not always the answer? His father shook his head, sadly, as if he were looking at a child who could not understand a simple truth. Then you are no longer Amish, my son. Then you are someone who has chosen another path. The words hung between them, heavy as a verdict. Jonas felt something inside him crack. I love Lydia Zook, he said suddenly, the words bursting out without permission. I want to marry her. I want to stay here, on this land, to live as you lived, as grandfather lived. But I also want this land to remain. I want our children to be able to run through the same fields. And if that means going to secular offices and using their law, then I will do it. His father was silent for a long time. Then he stood, came to Jonas, and laid a hand on his shoulder. Then may God help you, son, he said softly, because the community will not. He walked out, leaving Jonas alone in the kitchen with the envelope pressed to his heart and a growing understanding that the choice he had made would cost more than he had thought. The baptism service was to take place in 2 weeks. Lydia prepared herself as the rite required. She attended meetings with the other candidates, listened to the elders' counsel, and memorized the confession of faith. But each time she repeated the words about humility, about devotion to the community, about renouncing the world. Something tightened in her throat. She met Jonas in secret by the oak after sunset, when her parents thought she was praying or sewing. They spoke about the documents and the plan. Jonas wanted to show the papers to the elders before the baptism, but Lydia begged him to wait. After, she said, after the baptism, when I am already a full member of the community, then my voice will carry more weight. Then they will not be able to say I am just a foolish girl. Jonas was not convinced, but he agreed. He understood her fear. He understood that baptism was a point of no return. Afterward, she would not be able to leave, would not be able to choose another life without being placed under maiden formal shunning by the community when everyone refuses contact. One evening, as they sat under the oak, Jonas took her hand and said, Lydia, are you sure? About the baptism, about me, about all of this? Because if there is even the smallest doubt— There are doubts, she interrupted. Of course there are. I doubt everything. I doubt God, I doubt the community, I doubt myself. But I do not doubt you. And I do not doubt that I want to stay here on this land. Those are the only 2 things of which I am certain. He kissed her long and deep, and Lydia felt something in her melt. Jonas's hands slid along her back and drew her closer, and she did not pull away. She let herself feel the warmth of his body, the heartbeat through his shirt, the longing rising between them, dangerous and sweet. We cannot, Jonas whispered, but his lips were already at her neck and his hands at her waist. I know, Lydia whispered back, but her fingers were already undoing his buttons. They knew the rules. They knew that intimacy before marriage was a sin, that their bodies did not belong to them alone, but to God and to the community. Yet in that moment, under the old oak and the stars, the rules felt far away, unreal. Jonas gently laid Lydia down on the grass and lay beside her. They did not cross a final threshold. They did not undress completely. They did not take the last step. But what passed between them, touches, kisses, warmth of skin against skin, breathless gasps, Tremors was enough for both of them to feel they had stepped over a line. When at last they pulled apart, clothes straightened and breathing steady, Lydia felt both guilty and free. She knew she should confess. She should tell the elders before the baptism. But if she did, they would not allow her to be baptized. They would say she was unclean and must first repent and prove her devotion. "I will not tell anyone," she whispered, "about this, about us." "Lydia, this is our secret, Jonas. Ours, not theirs." He looked at her for a long time, and she saw the struggle in his eyes. He knew the rules, too. He had grown up in a community where secrets are a betrayal and honesty is the root of trust. But he nodded, because he loved her, because he wanted her to stay, because he knew that if she did not receive baptism, they could never be together. The day of baptism was clear. The ceremony took place in Elder Miller's home, as most services did. The whole community gathered, every family, from the youngest children to the oldest grandparents. Lydia sat in the front row with the other candidates, 2 young men and 1 other young woman. All wore their best clothes, faces solemn. Elder Miller read from Holy Scripture. Words about humility, obedience, and renouncing pride. Lydia listened, but her thoughts were elsewhere at the oak, with Jonas, with the documents in his trunk waiting for their moment. Then came the time for confession. Each candidate had to stand, declare sins before the community, and ask forgiveness. It was part of the rite cleansing before full membership. The young men spoke of small things, disobeying parents, laziness, anger. The young woman spoke of envy and of breaking the Sabbath rest. Then it was Lydia's turn. She rose, her heart pounding. She looked at the community, at her father sitting with his back straight, at her mother with hands folded in her lap, at Jonas standing in the back, leaning against the wall, eyes dark and intent. "I have sinned in pride," she began, her voice shaking. "I thought I knew better than the community. I thought my desires mattered more than the will of God." She fell silent. She was supposed to say more. She was supposed to speak of Jonas, of the touches beneath the oak, of the line they had crossed. But the words stuck in her throat. "I ask forgiveness," she finished softly, "and I promise to live in humility and obedience." Elder Miller nodded. The community remained quiet, not approval, not condemnation, simply acceptance. Lydia sat, cold sweat trickling down her back. She had lied by omission. She had concealed. And now it would lie between her and God, between her and the community, forever. The rite continued. The elder sprinkled each candidate with water, speaking the words of baptism in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. When it was Lydia's turn, she closed her eyes and felt the drops touch her forehead and run down her cheeks like tears. "Do you receive Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior?" the elder asked. "I do," Lydia whispered. "Do you renounce the world, its temptations, and its pride?" "I do." "Do you promise to live in unity with the community, to obey the ordnung, the community's unwritten code of conduct, and the elders?" "I do." At that moment, Lydia felt something strange. Not relief, not joy, but weight. It was as if an unseen burden had been laid across her shoulders, a promise that bound her forever. When the ceremony ended, the community came forward to greet the new members. The women embraced Lydia. The men shook her father's hand. Her mother cried, whether from happiness or from relief, Lydia did not know. Her father simply stood looking at his daughter, and in his eyes there was something complicated that she could not read. Jonas came last. He offered his hand formally, as custom required, and Lydia shook it. Their fingers held a fraction longer than they should have, and she felt his gentle squeeze, a soundless message. "I am here, I am with you, we will do this." "Congratulations, Lydia," he said loudly for all to hear. "You are now a full member of the community." "Thank you, Jonas." He let her hand go and stepped back, and Lydia watched him walk away, feeling something inside her scream and pull, wanting to run to him and tell everyone that she loved him, that they would be together, that nothing else mattered. But she was silent. She smiled. She thanked people for their good wishes. She played the part of the young woman who had just dedicated her life to God and the community. and she hid deep inside the knowledge that she had already broken that promise, that she had deceived them, and that sooner or later the truth would come out. A week after the baptism, the county sent an official notice. Road construction would begin in the spring. The community had 2 months to file objections or agree to compensation. Elder Miller called an emergency meeting. This time, the atmosphere was different, not calm, but tense. People spoke louder, waved their hands, and Lydia felt fear thickening like fog. "We must send a delegation," said one of the deacons, Abraham Stoltzfus. "We must speak to them directly. We must explain that this is not just land, it is our life." "And what will we say?" someone in the crowd asked. "That our feelings are more important than their roads?" "We will tell the truth." Deacon Zook rose, and Lydia felt pride in her father. "That this land is sacred, that our forebears are buried here, that it is not mere property but part of our bond with God." "They will not understand," Abraham said, shaking his head. "To them, land is only a resource." "Then we will make them understand." Jonas stood, and everyone turned. Lydia held her breath. "I have documents," he said, taking out the envelope. "Official records from the county archive. They confirm that there is a family cemetery on the Zook land. It was registered back in the 19th century. Under their own law, they cannot build across a cemetery without a special permit." Silence. Then an eruption of voices, some approving, some indignant. "You went to the archive?" Abraham asked sharply. "To a secular office?" "Yes," Jonas said, meeting his eyes. "I did what needed to be done." "You broke the ordnung." "I saved our land." Elder Miller raised a hand for quiet. "Jonas, show us the documents." Jonas stepped forward and handed over the envelope. The elder opened it, read slowly, and passed the pages to the other deacons. They read, whispered, nodded, or shook their heads. At last, Elder Miller looked at Jonas. "These documents, they may help, but the fact remains, you went out into the world to get them, without the community's permission. That is," he paused, choosing his words, "that is a problem, Jonas." "Which problem matters more?" Jonas asked, his voice firm but not combative. "That I broke a rule, or that we will lose the land?" "Both problems matter," the elder replied. "If we begin to ignore our rules for the sake of results, what will be left of us? We will become like them people for whom the end justifies the means." Lydia could not stay silent. She rose, and everyone looked at her. Women did not usually speak at meetings, but she was now a full member. She had the right. "Elder," she said, her voice trembling but unbroken, "Jonas did this for us, for the community, not for himself. He took a risk, knowing that you might condemn him, but he did it because he loves this land, because he loves us." She did not add, "because he loves me," but her eyes met Jonas's for an instant, and anyone watching could see it. Deacon Zook stood, his face taut. "Lydia, sit down," he said quietly. "No, Father," she answered, surprised by her own voice, steady and resolved. "I have the right to speak. I am a member now, and I say Jonas is right. We cannot simply give up. Not when there is a chance." "Even if that chance costs us our unity?" Abraham Stoltzfus asked. "What is unity worth if we have no land on which to live?" A murmur of approval from some, outrage from others. The community was splitting. Lydia could see it, could feel it. Some wanted to fight, others wanted to submit, and she, standing here defending Jonas, was becoming the symbol of that split. Elder Miller again called for quiet. "Enough," he said firmly. "We will vote. Who is in favor of using these documents, going to the county, and trying to stop the construction?" Hands went up more than the year before. Jonas, Lydia, although women technically did not vote, she raised her hand, several young families, some farmers whose land bordered the Zooks. "Who is opposed?" Other hands, fewer, but still many. "Who abstains?" The rest. The elder counted and then announced, "The majority is in favor. We will go to the county. But," he looked at Jonas, "that does not mean the question of your actions is settled, Jonas." The community will take that up later, separately. Jonas nodded, accepting it. Lydia felt the tension ease from her shoulders, though not entirely. They had won a battle, but the war was still ahead. After the meeting, Lydia waited by the buggy while her father spoke with the elders. Jonas came quietly and stood beside her without touching her. "Thank you," he whispered, "for speaking up. I told the truth." "I know, but the truth does not always make one popular." Lydia gave a sad smile. "I do not want to be popular. I want to keep our land, our life." "Our life," Jonas repeated, and the word hung between them, warm and full of promise. Lydia's father stepped away from the elders, saw them together, and stopped. Something crossed his face, not anger, but sorrow. He approached, and Jonas stepped back to give him space. "Lydia," the deacon said, "it is time to go home." "Yes, father." She climbed into the buggy, and her father took up the reins. As they pulled away, Lydia looked back. Jonas stood watching them go, and even at a distance she could feel his gaze warm, faithful, unshakable. On the road her father was silent longer than usual. Then, when they were nearly home, he said, "You love him, Jonas." It was not a question. Lydia did not know whether to deny it. But she had just promised God to live in truth, and a lie felt worse than a confession. "Yes." "Has he asked for your hand?" "Not yet, but he wants to." Her father nodded, stroking the horse's neck. "Jonas is a good young man," he said slowly, "but there is something restless in him, something that will not let him remain entirely here. Do you understand that?" "I do." "And you still want to be with him?" Lydia looked at her father, at his tired face and the hands on the reins, calloused like Jonas's hands from work and faith. "Yes," she said softly, "I still want that." Deacon Zook sighed long and heavy, as if he were giving up something precious. "Then let it be so. When he comes to ask, I will not refuse. But know this, daughter, life with such a man will not be easy. You will both live at the edge, and that wears a person down." "I know, father." They drove the rest of the way in silence, but it was a different kind of silence, not cold, but warm. Acceptance. A blessing, though tinged with sadness. The delegation met with Mrs. Clark and county representatives at the municipal building. Lydia had no right to go. The delegation was made up only of men, but Jonas repeated every word to her that night under the oak. Elder Miller, Deacon Zook, Abraham Stoltzfus, and Jonas. 4 Amish men in traditional clothing in a room where everything was chrome and plastic. Mrs. Clark proved to be a woman past 50, in a business suit with short hair. She greeted them politely and invited them to sit. "Gentlemen," she began, "I understand that you are concerned about the road project. Let me assure you, we have considered all factors. This is the most efficient route from both engineering and economic points of view." Mrs. Clark, Elder Miller spoke slowly, choosing his English words with care. "We are not against progress, not against roads, but this land, it is special, for us." "I understand the emotional attachment," she said with a nod, "but we have offered just compensation. It is above market value." "Things that matter do not have market value," Deacon Zook said. Mrs. Clark fell silent, and Jonas saw that his words had touched something in her. "I do understand," she said more quietly. "I truly do. But my hands are tied, unless there are legal grounds." "There are," Jonas said, placing the envelope on the table. "These are documents from the county archive. They confirm that there is a registered cemetery on the Zook parcel. It is a family cemetery, but it is official." Mrs. Clark took the documents and read them carefully. Her brows drew together. "This," she looked at her assistant, a man in glasses who immediately began typing on a laptop. "If this is true, we will have to reassess the route." "It is true," Jonas said, leaning forward. "And under your own law, building through a historic cemetery requires a special permit and an archaeological assessment. That will take months, perhaps years." Mrs. Clark exchanged a look with her assistant. "This greatly complicates the matter," she said at last. We will need time to verify these documents and consult with legal. How much time? Elder Miller asked. A month, perhaps 2. And what will happen then? Mrs. Clark sighed. If the documents are genuine, and I have no reason to doubt it, we will need to consider alternate routes. That will delay the project by at least a year. It may be canceled altogether. Relief filled the room like a tide. Deacon Zook closed his eyes, his lips moving in a silent prayer. For the first time since the meeting began, Abraham Stoltzfus smiled. But Jonas saw something else in Mrs. Clark's eyes, something that made him uneasy. There is a problem, she said slowly. Even if we change the route this time, the region is growing. Sooner or later, there will be a need for new roads and new projects. Your lands are in a development zone. This will not be the last time you have to fight. Then we will fight, Jonas said quietly. Even if that means more contact with the outside world, more compromises with your principles? Jonas did not answer, because he knew she was right. This was not a victory so much as a reprieve. The world would not stop. It would keep pressing in, slowly and relentlessly, and sooner or later the community would face a choice: adapt or disappear. When Jonas told Lydia all of this that night, she listened in silence and then embraced him. We won, she whispered. That is what matters. For this time, Jonas said, holding her close. But Mrs. Clark was right. This is not the end. Then we will take what we have. A year, 2 years, as many as God grants, and we will live them so that they are worth the struggle. Jonas drew back and looked into her eyes. Lydia Zook, he said formally, though his voice shook. I want to go to your father tomorrow. I want to ask for your hand, officially. Lydia's heart pounded so loudly, it seemed the whole county could hear it. He will say yes, she whispered. I know it. How do you know? Because he loves me. The next morning Jonas came to the Zook house when the sun had just begun to lift above the fields, turning the heads of grain to gold. His buggy stood at the gate, the horses snorted softly, and he held his hat in his hands as if it were a shield. Deacon Zook stepped onto the porch. Lydia stood behind the window, holding her breath, and her mother at her side gripped the edge of her apron as if praying without words. Deacon Zook, Jonas began, his voice steady but his eyes aflame. I have not come as a neighbor or a friend. I have come as a man seeking a blessing. I love your daughter. I love her as Christ loves the church purely, without selfishness, ready to give everything. I want to take Lydia as my wife, to live with her here on this land, to serve the community and God. But I know my road is not simple. I know I bring the shadows of Rumspringa with me, doubts that cause fear. So I ask you, allow me to prove that I am worthy. Allow me to be her support as you have been for your wife. The deacon was silent a long time, looking not at Jonas, but at the field beyond his shoulder, the very field that now had a chance to survive. At last he reached out his hand not for a shake, but to lay it on Jonas's shoulder. You are not sinless, Jonas, he said quietly. But which of us is without sin? You fought for us when others submitted. You brought hope when none was expected. And I see in your eyes what I saw in myself when I asked for your mother's hand, a fire that will not go out. Go, son, I bless you. But remember, marriage is not the end of the struggle. It is the beginning. You will be a support for Lydia, and she will be a support for you. Together you will endure. Jonas went to his knees not from weakness, but from gratitude, and the deacon set his hand on Jonas's head as an elder does at baptism. Watching from the window, Lydia felt the weight lift from her shoulders. She stepped onto the porch, and when their eyes met, words were unnecessary. Jonas stood, and they simply stood together side by side, not yet one, in that space where everything is still possible. The wedding took place in the fall. The ceremony was as simple as everything in their lives. At the miller's house, at long tables with room for the entire community. Lydia walked to Jonas in a dress she had sewn herself. Jonas stood beside the elder in a new straw hat, his hands clenched but his eyes calm, as if he already knew God was whispering yes. Elder Miller read from the Bible about Ruth and bows about love that grows out of a field and fidelity stronger than storms. The community sang hymns, soft and melodic, and when Jonas and Lydia exchanged vows, a holy hush filled the room, the kind that is a prayer. I receive you, Jonas said, holding her hands, in joy and in sorrow, in humility and in struggle. I will be your field, your oak, your quilt on cold nights. Lydia answered, I receive you with your doubts and your strength. I will be your light, your road, your truth, no matter how bitter. After the wedding, they settled into a small house at the edge of the Zook fields, the one Lydia's grandfather had built for a young couple. They spent their first night not in bed, but on the doorstep, looking up at stars winking above the oak. The documents had worked. The county shifted the route, the road bent around, and the land remained for a year, for 5 years, perhaps for a generation. They knew it was not a forever victory. The world grows and presses in, and one day they would have to fight again. But now they would fight together. Subscribe to our channel so that you do not miss anything, because this is nothing compared to what comes next. If you are under 18, do not even think about clicking next.